College football nerds. We are finally, I think, fully back. No hospital visits for me. No weird preseason content. We are talking football. We are doing one of our favorite segments we used to do. We're bringing it back. Josh and I are going to do a hopefully weekly top 10 where we, yes, give our top 10, but also just kind of observe what happened over the weekend. Generally talk ball. I'm going to be a little breathless. I spent last week in the ICU, went in for a routine emergency gallbladder removal, ended up having a pulmonary edema, was breathing on a machine for a couple of days, and somehow recovery in a week's time has been miraculous. I want to thank everyone for thoughts and prayers and just reaching out either through comments on Twitter. It was really... I said this on Twitter, but I truly mean it. When I was sitting there just down bad on Sunday with this machine on my face, I think it was Sunday or Monday, reading through those notes, it was awesome. God is good. Here we are. Let's talk some football. All right, Josh, a lot has happened this weekend. LSU and USC are still playing. I don't have LSU or USC in my top 10, whoever wins this game. So I think it's okay to continue. Real quick, do you have LSU or USC winner in the top 10?
Not at the moment. I don't think I would have had either one of my top 10 before the game. So I think it's fair to leave them both out. You know, a not top 10 team beating a not top 10 team, be it from a quality perspective or a resume perspective. Everybody that I have in front of them is undefeated. So at this point, I think, they're not going to be on my top 10.
So you are tipping your hand and saying that you don't have Texas A&M in the top 10. Okay. So I want you to give your top 10, but I'm going to go on a mini rant when I get to my number 2. So just leave a little room for that, and I'll probably run out of air and you can finish her out. But I want you to kind of talk through at a high level how you do your rankings, because it's not a straight ranking and it's not a power rating. Just kind of your philosophy when you sit down and do a top 10, and then just get into yours.
My philosophy with top 10s is that I rank teams based on essentially how you did with your schedule and how I think somebody else would have done with your schedule. And what I mean by that is, and it's hard to do with 1 week, admittedly, but the idea being, when you played the teams you played, if you're 4 weeks into the season and you've beaten 2 top 25 teams and somebody else has played a top 10 team and nobody, if you lost to the 2 top 25 teams, does the team that played the top 10 team and lost bad and then beat the others, do I think they would have beaten the top 25 teams? Or would they have lost both of them? Or would they have split them? And vice versa. Did the team, let's say you beat 2 top 25s, somebody else lost close to a top 10, beat everybody else in a blowout, do I think the team that beat the top 25s would actually beat the top 10? Or would they not, right? And I think that's, to me, conceptually, we've done this for years, it's the best way to deal with it, is to try to imagine the idea of trading schedules and saying, how would it look if you traded schedules? Knowing that, hey, this team dropped a stupid loss to a bad 40th quality team, they probably would have done the same with the other schedule. That's just kind of the way I evaluate it. And I'll say, when we get the website running, and Daniel, I'm going to speak for us both at this point and say we are going to get it running. Obviously, we've been a little predisposed with Daniel, and we've got to get the database filtered in. There's a bunch of stuff mechanically we needed to do that didn't get done, so now we're going to have to be able to find time to do that. And I'm not sure exactly when it'll happen, but I will say, Daniel, probably by week 4, I would imagine we'll have this up and running, given absence of hiccups, which is the time when we can actually run the model. And when we can run the model in week 4, we've got enough data to do that. Our model will do a power rating where it takes every team in the country and then it simulates models playing a game against every other team in the country and says, what would your total record be if you played the rest of college football? And then that result is used as the power rating. So it takes this concept and sort of blows it out into the broader concept of what it would look like. So for my top 10, it goes in order with that philosophy. Number 1 is Georgia. I think right now, if you don't have Georgia the number 1 team in the country based on how they looked against Clemson, how they are as a football team, what we know they're returning, you're nuts. They had the most impressive performance of any team in week 1. They look like the most complete roster of anyone in week 1. They've got to be number 1. Number 2 for me, and basically there's a big crop here, which I think you are almost interchangeable. It's Texas. I think Texas didn't look completely spotless, but they looked very good in their opener against Colorado State. Colorado State's also one of those teams that's not Not a great football team, but they are a competent football team, unlike some of the FCS teams, other SEC teams played in week one. Um, I thought defensively they looked a little more sound on the back end. I could tell they're missing their interior DTs, but they were pretty bland. I mean that Colorado State got a little more push in the run game than they would have last year when that was probably the best. Maybe Michigan accepted the best run defense in the country. But from the passing perspective, I thought the offense in the passing game looked good. The receivers looked good. They've got good running backs. Blue looked good. Hard to hold them back too much. Number 3 for me is Alabama. I thought Alabama looked extremely impressive in the opener. The defense was very effective. They didn't have any major busts. Again, a little bit like Colorado State, Western Kentucky was the kind of team that's able to challenge you a little bit in that way. TJ Finley is a quarterback that's played high-level football for a while now. Not saying he's a great quarterback, but he is a more than competent one. Again, better than most of what these teams played. And they didn't really get much separation. They didn't do a whole lot in the passing game. Alabama, on the other hand, got multiple takeaways. They were pretty well aggressive, smothering, and extremely disruptive defensively. Offensively, Alabama was pretty well dominant, especially in the run game. And that was the big thing to me. It's been years since I've seen Alabama dominate anyone in the run game anywhere near like they did to Western Kentucky. That's a little bit scary for the rest of college football. It almost felt like a return to where they were 5 or 6 years ago. Number 4 is Oregon. And this is an interesting one that a lot of people probably would take offense to if you talk about on-field performance. But that Oregon-Idaho game did not go the way I think a lot of people thought it did if you just looked at a box score. The truth is Oregon was shooting themselves in the foot a lot, but they were clearly the better team. And there were several close games that played out, and one later in the list you're going to talk about with Michigan. But Oregon in that game looked like a team that at any point could put it away if they just stopped shooting themselves in the foot. And there was a point there late in the game where they decided they needed to score. They really moved the offense up, and they went right down the field. So as much as that was a game that was one that was a scary game and it was a close game late in the game for Oregon, I don't necessarily penalize them for this point at this point in the season. And I will say I don't think that's really who Oregon is. And I think it's a mistake if you think Oregon's taken a huge step back because of that game. That was clearly, if you go back and watch it, one of those just early game jitters. I will say there is a lack of explosiveness on offense from Oregon. That is the reason that they're down there at number 4. And I'm concerned about that. You could tell they're missing a couple pieces. You could tell they're missing nicks. And there just weren't any explosive plays in that offense. And that's something to really keep an eye on as they go into Big Ten defenses. Number 5 for me, and this is where it gets really hard, I'm going to have Ohio State. I thought Ohio State wasn't particularly impressive, but they were good enough. They were a little worse, frankly, than I was expecting them to be. I had said going into the preseason, we did a preview. I have my doubts about Will Howard as a quarterback. I have my doubts about whether or not Judkins was going to be an impact running back. And I said, look, those guys just need to be solid dudes. And I think for the most part they were. Will Howard was pretty good in that game. Judkins was a good change of pace back. I think at least game 1 I was correct in saying Henderson is really the lead tailback and the better back between the two. I think Judkins is just a very good quality second back, a very good 1B. He's not really going to elevate where you were already at with Henderson. But my bigger concern is it was kind of janky. I have said for a while I thought the offensive tackles have been something of a weakness. I had people talk down to me about that on the previews, and I saw it in that game. And Daniel probably will have more to say on that, but that Akron team is a bad team, and that is a team you should be just demolishing. And the fact that they couldn't, especially with the run game, is concerning. Number 6 is Ole Miss. They did nothing but obliterate Furman, but the problem is they're still Furman. There are a couple games like that one, Auburn versus Alabama and A&M, where when I went back and watched tape of those games, those were somebody playing college football and freshmen. College football 25 on freshmen. No one was close at any point. The line in the scrimmage was so comically lopsided that it wasn't really a functional game. Nobody on the back end could stay with them from a speed perspective. Tennessee, I will say, is also kind of in that boat, which we are going to do a preview, and you should look out for that of that Tennessee-NC State game. It's kind of a placeholder for me at this point with Ole Miss. You might as well not have played week 1. Did everything you're supposed to, but it didn't matter much. Notre Dame is number 7. I was impressed and not impressed with Notre Dame. I thought defensively they were absolutely looked a part of a top 5 unit. That was kind of what we expected, and I flagged in the preview that I thought they were going to probably be a legitimate top 5 national defense. Offensively, they looked worse than I anticipated. I have never been that high on Riley Leonard as a passer. I think that showed. I think you saw where he's a gamer. He can make plays with his legs. He can extend things and score some points. But until they find another gear offensively, it's going to limit them. Texas A&M is a very good defense. Texas A&M's front is an excellent front. It was expected to give that new Notre Dame offensive line problems, and it did until very late in the game where I think Texas A&M's depth finally got tired. But I don't know that I quite excuse where Notre Dame was at offensively in a game where, quite frankly, I was more unimpressed with Wegman and what Texas A&M was offensively, and more surprised by how many issues they had than probably any other issue in that game. Number 8, another placeholder, is Missouri. They're hanging around. They did everything they're supposed to do. I have no reason to knock them. I think they're a good football team. Number 9 is Penn State, who started slow, picked up, and played better as the game went on. I was reasonably happy with where they were at. I think the running backs are good. The defense is quite good. Still don't like the receiving core. Still don't love the passing game against overmatched competition. And finally, number 10 is Michigan. In Michigan, in that Fresno State game, they scared me. Their defense is excellent. Look, I mean, the defense, if you're a Michigan fan, is great. It is everything I think you expected it to be. We'll still see how it looks against better competition, because I will say Keene. I'll say Keene, and I'll also note Lane, who was the quarterback playing against Oregon, the quarterback in Idaho. Those quarterbacks had really bad days, and it does a lot for you defensively. The other quarterback can't hit the broadside of a barn. But offensively, Michigan has real issues. I thought Warren made most of the plays in front of him. I think a lot of the offensive issues are just more holistic. The scheme's not very innovative. The receivers are not particularly good. And Edwards is a good back, and Mullings at times carried the offense, but he's not explosive, and Edwards is not really a between-the-tackles runner at the level you hope him to be. So that's a team that I think right now has some stuff to figure out if they want to be higher than 10th. So, Daniel, that's my top 10. What's yours?
I think you're a little generous with Michigan and Oregon, and we'll get into that. My top 3 are just like yours. Georgia is self-explanatory. Not only were they preseason number 1, but they also handled business against a Clemson team that I think is on the downswing. You can't be that bad at quarterback and keep Georgia at bay for too long. Texas had some moments that I didn't love, but overall, I think that, a theme throughout my discussion here is all these teams are pretty vanilla right now because they're not playing anybody. And there is absolutely no reason to show your hand if you're Texas against Colorado State the week before you go on the road to play Michigan. That would be silly. But I also think that we know what we're going to get with Texas. I think Ewers is hit his ceiling. I think they can win a championship with him. I don't know that he's that elite plus quarterback that maybe gets credit for. Number 3 is Alabama for me as well. I had questions about Alabama coming into the season. There was some of the flashes of old Alabama, last year Alabama offense that should be concerning to Alabama fans, but I did notice some more progression work from Jalen Milroe. Some of the times where he held on the ball, like the long run, the 40-something yard run, he held on the ball and in the face of a 6-man blitz for a long time, but it's because his primary read got held, and they got a flag for it. The running game was impressive to me. The way they pull blockers that they haven't really done in the past looks pretty effective. They were super vanilla. A lot of the pre-snap eye candy stuff that you see from a DeBoer offense, you didn't really see yesterday. But the question mark I didn't have was offense. Alabama's going to get, if they need 30-something points, they're going to get it. My question is, are they going to lose games 37-39? And honestly, that defense is something that I haven't seen that kind of defense at Alabama since like 2018. So I was pretty impressed with that, even with the young faces involved. And they played a ton of people. Ohio State, for me, this is where I kind of get into rant mode. Ohio State, and I've been going at it with Ohio State fans all day on Twitter because I said I don't have them at number 2 right now. And their fans are so locked into how AP polls work that they're like, you're dinging me. You're knocking me down for 52-6 win. That's not fair. Why are you dropping me when I won 52-6? But the thing is, we're all starting out week 1. We've all got one game to go on. And for me, like, look, that game was 17-3 at the half. I think that Howard threw for like 8 yards an attempt. They ran for like 5 yards a carry. Offensive line struggled. They played half that game against Akron's backup quarterback. So we're talking about a 2-10 team last year playing their backup quarterback, 2-10 G5 team playing their backup quarterback, and you're 17-3 at the half with multiple possessions. And overall, just, I know Ohio State was playing vanilla, but everybody was. And so what do I do with that? Like, do I say, okay, we're going to stick with what the hypotheticals were in July, or we're going to take actual data and say Alabama performed better against better competition, Texas performed better against better competition? I don't know by what other metric do you put Ohio State at number 2 other than we're going to ignore the actual games and we're going to give them credit for who we think they can be in the future when these other teams are already there. And I just don't. Ohio State, in my opinion, does not beat Alabama, Texas, Miami even yesterday. And that doesn't mean they can't. You've got a new quarterback working in a new system for him. They're feeling each other out. Offensive line's going to gel throughout the course of the year, but I'm not giving them that credit until it happens. They go out and smoke somebody good in week 6. I'm going to move them up, right? Like, I don't do that. You're stuck where you're at unless you lose. I think that's dumb, because that again is saying we know more in July with no data than we know 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks in with actual data. And that is absolutely hilarious to me that people do that. It's not a shot at Ohio State. It's just that I'm now reacting to data. And Ohio State, yes, they won 52-6, but it was a hard 52-6. Like, Howard threw a touchdown pass in the fourth quarter. It's not the end of the world. Ohio State can turn into that team. I just want to see him turn into that team and not preemptively get him credit for that. Anyway, I've got Miami at number 5, and this is a big jump, and this is probably overreaction territory because Florida sucks. Florida's product they put on the field yesterday was embarrassing. They quit. Several players quit on the team. Damian George, Alabama transfer, you saw him jogging on a interception return. Just overall energy was pretty bad. But I like what I saw from Miami, and I like when I see teams who can dominate teams that have recruited well. Now, they've got their own Florida's got their problems, but they were able to dominate a team on the road that's got a decent amount of talent. Look, Florida's not Alabama, Florida's not Ohio State, but they're also not Akron. So that was impressive to me. I think Miami's schedule sets them up to be highly ranked, and I don't like to do that where I say you're highly ranked now because you don't play nobody and you're going to have a clean record. But I think they're going to be in that mix at the end of the year. Ole Miss at number 6 for me. Again, this is kind of a placeholder because I don't know who they are. I think that putting up 52 points in a half on Furman means nothing. Penn State number 7. Josh, I had the same exact takeaway as you, but I also want to give Penn State credit for winning soundly on the road in a hostile environment. Morgantown's a tough place to play. I just can't put my finger on it, but that passing game is just not there for me. And I also have questions. I think their defense is great. I have questions of whether or not it's going to scale, but I don't know that it matters because Penn State doesn't get Ohio State and Michigan this year. I think they're going to have a pretty good year. I've got Tennessee at number 8. I've got some questions about that offense against a real defense. But for now, we've got two data points for Nico. I think they beat Iowa 31-0 in the bowl game. And then, it was Smoke City yesterday. So I really like that offense. I don't know if they have a defense. Notre Dame number 9. And this is just because there's nobody else out there. You said it best, Josh, in that I was more concerned with what I saw from Texas A&M offensively than I was excited for what I saw maybe overall from Notre Dame. That A&M offense is rough, but I also do agree with you. Notre Dame, top 5 defense. Oregon, I had a hard time putting them at number 10, and this is where I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. Dylan Gabriel threw it 49 times. They had 2.9 yards per carry, 14 points through 3 quarters. They were trying hard. So it's like, yes, they had a bad game. Yes, they had some statistics, but it was like 7 yards an attempt. Like, he had a bunch of yards passing, but he threw it almost 50 times to get there. That was like the most try-hard to produce 14 points against Idaho in 3 quarters I've ever seen. So I got them at 10, but it's only because I have no faith in anybody behind them. And I think Missouri, I'm maintaining this. I think they're a good team, but might be a paper tiger. No pun intended. We won't know just because of their schedule. Josh, I got a team I want you to talk about a little bit that could be, should be maybe in our top 10, but isn't there yet. And we both left them out in spite of them also winning big. Ohio State fans, we apply this evenly. And I want you to talk about them for a little bit, and that's Oklahoma. You and I watched that game at the same time. We're texting back and forth. Can you get into kind of what you thought about Oklahoma and maybe why they're not in your top 10?
Sure. So with Oklahoma, I think the thing to me was, first off, I was not at all impressed about Temple. I think both of us shared a thought on this, which is that the Temple quarterback, and this was the case for a lot of teams this past week, was awful. And I'll do a quick aside here to note, it feels like this year was almost the year of bad quarterback play in week one. Now, every year we see week one, there's a lot of teams that are rough, and we always forget that teams all look like they're playing bad football through like week 4 or 5. And a lot of teams that have a lot of new starters will turn it around. But it's really clear that the transfer portal drain is hitting G5s, because the few G5s that should have had better quarterbacks, they've all left, and it's kind of trickled down guys that weren't very good at the upper level. And a lot of these games were really, to me, defined by how bad the quarterback play was by the second or third tier team that was playing up in competition. And that was kind of the deal for me with Oklahoma, who looked really good in some ways. But again, I think, the 2 interceptions from the Temple QB, the fact that he was completely ineffective, sort of hid the fact that Oklahoma threw for 5.4 yards per attempt. I mean, they ran well, ran it for 6 yards a carry. They had a couple guys go over 10 yards a carry, have some long runs. So Daniel, I will say, at least for my part, I wasn't that sold on Oklahoma. It was, to me, a game where I thought they were shaky. I didn't see them having a complete offense in the way I would hope for. I felt like I came away with a lot of concerns about where Jackson Arnold was. And defensively, I just felt like Temple was so inept offensively that it kind of made them look a little better than they were. So for my part, I thought they looked like a good football team, but I still came back around having the same concerns that I had going into the game about the offensive line and everything else.
Yards per attempt numbers aren't the end of the world, but I think Arnold had 5.5 yards per attempt against that Temple team that was terrible. And at one point, the stat that I tweeted was the Temple quarterback started out 1 for 7 for -2 yards with a fumble and an interception. So it's like they had an 18-yard drive, a 20-yard drive. Yes, you have a lot of points, but there's some concern there that really, and I think some of it actually is Jackson Arnold, but I think also some of it is offensive line. And I believe that offensive line is the thing that kind of grows the most over the course of the year. So there's still room there. But yeah, that's the one that I had left out of the top 10. Or this one's running a little long, but I want you to give us a kind of parting shot on maybe how people overreact to week one and what we actually are seeing in week one versus what we maybe think we see like we're watching something in week 10 or 11.
Look, it's the first week of the year. Teams change. Teams come out and have jitters. Yeah, the Oregon statement seems contradictory no matter how you do it in terms of where they rank, because if you go based on their performance last week, I think Oregon would have lost to a lot of teams last week with the way they played, all the mistakes they made. Lanning was furious at the press conference. You can have whatever opinion you want. They played bad football. But I'm, I guess, kind of halfway doing a power rating with them because of where I feel like they can be. And kind of buried in all that is so many teams in week one do things like they only run zone runs to the inside, right? They're not going to pull guards. They're not going to pull tackles. They're not going to show their blocking schemes. They're just going to do a zone run. It doesn't matter if it's a 7-man box, 8-man box, whatever. And so they look mediocre. They win by not a huge margin, and the coaches feel happy because they made the players press. They made the offensive linemen really have to work, and they got tape where they wanted to get tape. So, the thing that matters to me is, one, that we're willing to change our rankings week to week. And if we're going to do a top 10 week one, it's very important that I'm not going to be in any way married to it when I get to week two. I'm going to change it and redo it completely based off where I think it needs to be, because we're going to have probably a completely new set of data. And then from there, just kind of keep changing. So, Ohio State fans can be mad about week one, but look, we were just not tied to whatever preconceived notions were. We got 1 week of data. I looked at teams for 1 week. This is how good I think they are, almost really from a power rating perspective, because you're 1 game in. And week two, I'll restart and do it all over again. And if Ohio State looks like a different team in week two, ranking's going to change. And I think that's the way it needs to be.
I think so many people get mad at us because of the way we do it, because they are used to and conditioned with the AP voter method, the coaches poll voter method, in that everything you do after your preseason poll is to validate your preseason poll. So you don't drop anybody if they don't lose, which is crazy because you don't know these teams from Adam right now. And we are different in that our top 10 week to week is wildly different. Like, we'll shuffle teams up and down a lot because we care more about the data on the field than what we even thought in July, much less the AP. So it's a lot of fun. And Ohio State fans that are mad at me, half the Ohio State fans are like, y'all, it doesn't matter. It's week one. Like, who cares where you're ranked? And it's a 12-team playoff. Again, who cares? Like, you're either going to win the league, get one of those 4 spots, or going to be like 5th or 6th and get a home game. So who cares? Which is a whole other topic of, like, I wish people did care a little more, but whatever. Expanded playoffs, we're here. All right, y'all, thanks so much for this. Let us know what your top 10 looks like in the comments and where we got ours wrong. Remember, we are still trying to get the algorithm juices flowing on this, so if you can share this anywhere or just any comment, like, subscribe, it helps us a whole lot. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.